Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. With me is one of my favorite guests, appearing for like the fourth time on my show, Branko Marcetic. How you doing, Branko?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Now, Branko is a staff writer for Jacobin, but he's also the author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. And I interviewed him in 2020, and it was ended up being a 90-minute interview because the book covers 5 decades of Biden's career since he's been in the Senate since he's 29. So we had a lot to go over. And then right after Biden won office, Branko came on again to talk about, the first 100 days and how progressive they'd be. And then 3 years later, we reviewed him again. And now we're going to come and talk about if he's going to be a one-term president. And there's a lot of reasons for us thinking that. But first, I wanted to talk about the Michigan primary, which last night, the uncommitted vote, which was a protest vote against Joe Biden, organized by mostly the Muslim American community, far exceeded their goals of 10,000 votes and got 100,000 votes, which was over 13% of the electorate. And then if you add the almost 8% for Marianne Williamson, who actually had dropped out, and but she's unsuspended her campaign, and Dean Phillips, you have almost 20% not voting for Biden. So overall, what do you make of last night's results in Michigan, Branko?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty astounding result. I mean, for an incumbent president to get that much concerted opposition, not from, random voters, but these are Democratic voters. These are meant to be the people who are, in theory, most loyal to Biden and the people that you can most count on to turn out in November. And the fact that they actually came out, stood in line, not to vote for him, but to register the disapproval of him is a pretty major rebuke of an incumbent president. I can't think of anything, in recent history that kind of measures on that you can compare it to. I mean, Trump back in 2020, he, I think, got uncommitted, got second 4% of the voters. So it was about, I think a few thousand votes. This is 100,000. And I mean, as people have pointed out, Trump won Michigan by a tenth of that number back in 2016. Biden only won in 2020 by maybe about 55,000 more votes for that. So these are very small margins. If these voters can't be bothered coming out in November, Biden could be in trouble, especially because this time he's running not as the guy challenging a unpopular incumbent, but as the unpopular incumbent himself, and someone whose approval rating is already at a historic low. And on top of that, the fact that basically, certainly all the polls I've seen in recent months have Biden underwater in Michigan against Trump. So all of it, in theory, should be a big wake-up call to the president and the people around him, to let them know that, hey, they need to drastically change course on Israel-Gaza policy if they want to win. But whether they're going to, receive that message and actually act on it, I would like to think so, but I really don't know.
Yes, and also the enthusiasm gap. I heard yesterday that 40% fewer Democrats voted in the primary than Republicans did. And also today, Ryan Grimm on his show shared a poll from YouGov, which I will share, Economist YouGov poll that shows that Trump's net favorability rating has risen the most among the following subgroups since February 2021. And that is Blacks, a 45-point gain. Young people, ages 18 to 29, a 40-point gain. Hispanics, 27 points. People who make over 100,000, 27 points. Moderates, 22 points. People who make over 50,000, 20 points. Even liberals, 19 points, and Democrats, 17 points. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think it points to the fact that Biden has not done a good job of actually meeting voters where they are, and addressing their concerns and their real struggles in this economy. All the rhetoric from the Biden campaign and the Biden White House is basically the economy is going great. And if you feel otherwise, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. And that's, number one, a very insulting thing to tell voters. But number two, it leaves them completely adrift in an economy that obviously, you look at certain macroeconomic indicators is doing well. But when you drill down and actually look at people's experiences, people are really struggling. People are, there's a rise in hunger. There's a rise in people who are cost burdened by housing. Homelessness rocked up to a record number. I could go on and on. There's evictions are up to pre-pandemic highs, or even beating them in some cases. And the Biden campaign, the Biden White House seems completely, at best oblivious about this, or just kind of doesn't seem to care. And I think, when you think about some of the rhetoric that we heard in the past few years, where Biden tried to kind of co-opt the Bidenomics insult. It was initially kind of an insult, a criticism of his policy, and he tried to kind of turn it into a positive. But the thing is, he was talking about industrial policy to supply side economics, basically. The idea was to feed subsidies and into businesses, green businesses, chip makers, that kind of thing, that would theoretically trickle down towards people. I mean, unfortunately, that does not really kind of address a lot of people's day-to-day needs. So I think all of that is, people, especially in the American political system, where you have two choices and that's it, really. People inevitably end up just kind of swinging back and forth. And so Trump, people have not just the fact that he's the alternative to Biden, but the fact that they do have these rosy memories of the Trump years, where unemployment was, relatively low, and things seem to be kind of more normal for a lot of people in their daily lives. People, I think, because of that, there's this kind of residual, kind of goodwill, and people are more willing to kind of look at those years, and Trump himself in a more positive outlook. I mean, also, we shouldn't ignore the fact that Biden is facilitating what has now been declared by numerous people, the UN, the Holocaust scholars, the ICJ, of course, a genocide. And, Trump just kind of doesn't have to do anything. He just can sort of avoid the subject and not say anything. And people just will inevitably kind of go, well, this guy's not the one who's kind of facilitating mass murder. Even if, we know on an intellectual level that Trump would be probably worse than Biden on this issue.
Well, I really don't know about that. I mean, I remember Trump had a very non-interventionist policy, and he was mocked by the liberal media. I remember when he talked about getting us out of Syria, Rachel Maddow said how dangerous that would be. And when he made attempts, ham-handed though they be, to make peace between North and South Korea, he was mocked about that as well. And, the Abraham Accords, I listened to a very long article that the New York Times wrote. He, everything Trump does is motivated by his ego and his narcissism. He wanted to get a Nobel Peace Prize like Obama did, and he thought he would solve the Middle East problem. And as soon as he realized how complicated the Palestinian situation was, he told Jared, okay, we'll just make peace with the other countries. And I feel like Biden actually has a more dangerous ideology, his ideology of, democracy versus authoritarianism. And as a result of that ideology, we're now, fighting this proxy war with Russia in Ukraine. We're going to fight a proxy war with China through Taiwan. And this Middle East thing, if they don't figure out what to do about that, could erupt into a wider Mideast war. So trust me, I am not singing Trump's praises, and I have no intention of voting for the man. But I really think in this area, Biden is a lot worse. I don't know what you feel about that.
Well, I would say two things. Number one, I mean, it is true that Trump had kind of a non-interventionist bent, although that was often undermined by the people that he staffed around him. But also, Trump was very indulgent of Israel, and particularly Netanyahu. He was someone who basically just did whatever Israel wanted to do. Actually, I don't know if people remember, but I mean, but one of the big things in the Russiagate scandal, the Michael Flynn phone call with the Russian ambassador that got him in hot water. That was not actually about Russia policy. That was about protecting Israel. That was about kind of basically reassuring Israel that at the time there was a UN vote that was going to be very critical of Israel in the final days of the Obama administration. And Trump was basically trying to, as the incoming president, kind of undermine that and reassure the Israeli government that the US would maintain a loyal line. So Trump has been always pretty indulgent. I think he would probably be, just as eager as Biden to send Israel weapons as they carry out this horrific slaughter that we're watching. I think what would be different, though, and I think sadly one of the things that doesn't happen under Biden is there's no real opposition. It's not. It's significant that the only successful war powers resolution vote happened under Trump, but that was over the Yemen war. As soon as Biden came in, and that was it was led by Bernie Sanders. There were a lot of Democrats in favor of it. As soon as the government changed hands and it went to Biden, there was a Democrat in the White House. All of that completely went away. And I think if Trump was in there, I think you would get Democrats for completely self-serving reasons, but I think also because they wouldn't be shackled by the kind of the problem of party loyalty and having to not the problem of challenging your own president. I think they would be kind of more oppositional. They would be far more critical about what's happening under the U.S. government.
Also you have the same billionaires supporting both parties, whether it's Haim Saban, who says I'm a single issue guy and my issue is Israel, supporting the Democrats, or Sheldon Adelson. I guess he's dead now, but people like him supporting the Republicans. There's just such a big money behind, AIPAC and the Democratic majority for Israel. It's just become like the third rail of American politics. But getting back to Biden, he's not Jewish, and yet he is such a Zionist. And as his biographer, I'm wondering if you uncovered anything in the past that led to that. I mean, he literally seems to me to show, if not no feeling for Muslims or Arabs, perhaps prejudice. I mean, 100 days into this horrible genocide, he makes a speech to mark the 100 days and only talks about the Israeli victims or the Israeli hostage. Does not mention the word Palestinian once. Same thing last night in his acceptance speech in Michigan. Doesn't even refer to that uncommitted vote. And you might remember back during the, when Israel bombed Lebanon, and Menachem Begin, said there was this young senator, and he said, oh, it doesn't matter if you kill the women or children, you have to win. Well, that young senator was Joe Biden. So where do you think this comes from with him?
There actually is a piece I'm working on about this. I will say this. I don't think, if you look at the record, I don't think Biden was really always such a vehemently pro-Israel voice. There were quite a few times very early in his Senate career where he took positions, did votes that were contrary to what should be Israeli interests. What might be considered Israeli interests, and at some point it changed. I don't know why. That's part of what I'm looking at. But I will say there's an episode of my book that I talk about where this campaign volunteer, he was a graduate student, he was an intern at a local paper, and he happened to volunteer for Biden's campaign, as many young people in Delaware did at the time. And he quit, and he went to the paper and he said, the reason I'm quitting is because this guy asked me to write a position paper on the Middle East. And he said, I can't put my own personal viewpoints about what should happen with the Israel-Palestinian conflict because that would be, quote, political suicide. So I want you to write something that, is going to be politically palatable. And basically whatever position is outlined in this position paper is the position that I'm going to take for the rest of my career. And this particular person was very outraged by this. I believe what he said was, I felt like I was going to cheat Jews out of their money. So I had to kind of blow the whistle on this. And then, the campaign, all his campaign people denied this, but they didn't quite deny it. They said kind of, oh, well, Biden, he was just playing devil's advocate. Biden said, I might have said something like this, but it was part of a discussion. It was part of a debate. So I think, anyone who's actually looked at his career, and I can give you a million more examples of this, Biden has throughout his career said whatever he needed to say to get elected. I mean, he, in the course of just a few years, you can see him flip-flop, one way and then back on things like the balanced budget amendment and Social Security and Medicare and so on and so forth. So I do think it's politically driven. It's calculated to what's going to be the most politically effective thing. There's a quote by him. You don't want to sacrifice yourself in a small cross, meaning that the Palestinian cause is not really important enough, or it doesn't have enough political benefits for any politician to go on a limb. My question is, does he not realize that in this case, in 2024, we're decades out from this era, the political calculus around this issue is completely different, and certainly different now with this particular war because of how, to use his words, over the top and horrible it is, and the level of horrible images and videos that we're watching on a daily basis. Does he not realize that at this point, majorities of Americans across basically every demographic, all partisan lines, want a ceasefire and don't support what he's doing. And that's a mystery. There's been reporting in Politico in advance of this Michigan primary that Biden's aides, keep him in a bubble. That's what the one person in the know says. I wonder, is he even aware of just how toxically unpopular what he's doing is? I really don't know the question of that, but that to me is the only thing that explains, why he would be risking his entire presidency now for this war that no one really wants anymore.
Yeah, and it's surprising to me how they're still saying, oh, it's just the Muslims, and they're just 2% of the population. And they don't realize that it's also young people and it's African Americans. You have those 100 AME pastors coming out for this, ceasefire. You've got rabbis coming out for a ceasefire. You've got Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors protesting with Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now. You have this man who set himself on fire, who now, of course, they're trying to make into a mentally ill person, as opposed to this is the most righteous act of political protest. I mean, I could never do it. I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it, obviously. But he had if you read his Reddit post, he had a very systemic analysis of what's going on when it came to settler colonialism. And this is a new kind of, I don't know, maybe post-George Floyd analysis of what's happening in Israel, which makes it so, these causes become intersectional. And actually racial justice causes are aligning. Even Mandela said, we can't be free unless Palestinians are. So I think this is very huge. And it is, I think, the moral issue of my lifetime. I mean, I've never seen anything in the world so egregious as this. And probably because it's happening with, my tax dollars and in my name as a Jew. And I totally disavow this. And one more point. So he was on Seth Meyers the other night, and he gave like a 3-minute, 14-second answer. It was very comprehensive. He was very erudite. And I was wondering to myself if he rehearsed that, because we know how he is when he's speaking off the cuff. He's not very good, even before he came down with some cognitive decline. And I know because a friend of mine's daughter is Jimmy Kimmel's associate producer, that they tell them the questions in advance and they rehearse exactly how they're going to answer it. So I'm wondering, if you thought the same about that interview.
I mean, it was some ways good to see him on TV, because part of the problem with this campaign is that he's not, he seems incapable, or his advisors are terrified of putting him out there on television. I mean, he skipped the Super Bowl interview for the second year in a row while he's losing an election. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So on the one hand, it's, my thinking was, okay, so he's out there and actually can do these interviews, and then, fairly cogent answers. I didn't particularly like the answers, but you're right that he sounded a lot crisper than he has previously. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there's been multiple reports about this, beyond the dearth of interviews and TV appearances and press conferences and so on and so forth that he's done, among the lowest, actually the lowest for any modern president, other than, I think, Reagan's second term, I think. There's been reports that he is going to donors and he's using cue cards to answer seemingly spontaneous questions that apparently are actually pre-screened. So he's in these informal settings. And the reason that we know this is because the donors themselves bring up this as a concern. They say, well, hold on, why is he behind closed doors, taking prearranged questions, and then not just taking prearranged questions, but reading off cue cards to be able to answer them. There was, the time, I think once or twice in the last year that people spotted that he had these cheat cards that he was using at press conferences, where he was told, okay, this is the reporter that's going to ask you a question. This is the question they're going to ask, and here's a few bullet points so that you're able to answer the question. All of that is not normal, very strange. It's not what any president has done before, to my knowledge. It's definitely a concern. And for anyone who doesn't want a Trump presidency, I mean, the president has to go out there and campaign. He no longer has COVID to explain why he's not going to be in public and why he's not doing TV appearances. He has to be out there. And if he's not, or if worse, his own advisors see his best political asset being not to be out in public, that's a very worrying thing.
Yeah. Now, Trump obviously did not debate any of his Republican opponents. He didn't need to. But I think in this case, Trump is going to want to debate Biden, and Biden is going to be the one to decline. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea what the future holds, but certainly we've seen media figures. There was the Joe Scarborough show, the Morning Joe show on MSNBC. They were discussing this. So certainly it seems like people are kind of laying the groundwork, the intellectual groundwork to potentially at some point eventually kind of have some sort of justification for him doing this. But again,
justification for him not debating.
Yeah, exactly. But that's if, again, your perceived best asset is people not seeing you, that's a very worrying thing. I mean, there's no candidate who's down in the polls who would normally say, no, I don't want to debate. Usually it's actually the guy leading says he doesn't want to debate because it's the debate can only hurt the person because they can screw up or say something embarrassing and hurt the chances. It's the person who is down the polls who wants exposure, who wants to demonstrate to the public that they are a sure pair of hands, that wants to be seen. So it's again deeply odd and bizarre for this to now be kind of flipped, where the kind of incumbent is losing and sees his best case as no one seeing him.
Now, apparently they're very enthusiastic about their victory. Well, it's victory for them, obviously, to get 100,000 votes, and they're taking it on to Minnesota. And I don't know that they have an uncommitted line in Minnesota. But what do you think the chances of this protest vote continuing on through the rest of the primaries are? And how will they do it? If they don't have a way to vote, will they just write in ceasefire like they did in New Hampshire? That wasn't very big. Or will they vote for, Marianne or Dean Phillips, or will they just stay home?
I think it's probably going to depend state by state. I really don't know enough about the particular voting conventions of each state. But I think given number one, the success of this, whether that you're going to get 100,000 votes in each place from here, I don't know. But given the success of this particular campaign, and given how much media coverage it got, and given how embarrassing it's proven to the Biden administration, and how, from everything we've heard, it has been quite upsetting and driven sort of a bit of panic within the administration. I don't know why they wouldn't do it, because it seems to have been so far the most effective way, or one of the most effective ways, to light a fire under the White House and to kind of tell them, hey, you need to change this, otherwise you're going to lose.
Yeah.
So I think, like I said, I don't know if they're going to have the same exact success. I think there are very specific things about Michigan that mean that that there's a reason why it overperformed like it did. But you never know. And I mean, I will say the Michigan result happened after 3 weeks. Who knows? Perhaps in a different state, if you have more time to organize, perhaps if you have more resources to organize, you can get maybe not quite as high a result, but a comparably a high vote total. I don't know. I think people should definitely keep going with it, because it's so far the best way to send a message to this president.
Now, aside from him pivoting on Gaza, which I don't see him doing, I was shocked to see yesterday that he gave them another 2 weeks. They said by mid-March, Israel has got to, follow international law, meaning they can flout international law for another 2 weeks like they've done for 4 months. I mean, it's outrageous. Nobody expects him to live up to any of this. And so there's other issues too. So now he's trying to say, because the climate activists are protesting him everywhere he goes for, the Willow Project and the Alaska LNG project and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So they're, crowing, oh, it's a big victory because he paused any new LNG export terminals. But not really, because they're still going to proceed with all the ones that they've previously approved. And that's huge problem for climate change. The other thing is the student debt relief, 150,000 people or whatever it was. I may have the numbers wrong, but those were just programs that they were illegally charging them because they were fraudulent universities or whatever. Mostly these programs have expired. You were talking about before, people are not feeling it. The child tax credit expired. The student debt pause, repayment pause expired. Now the eviction are going to expire. In California, they're bracing for tens of thousands of new homeless because they're going to have to pay up or they'll get evicted. So, even in MSNBC's interviews in the black barbershops, African Americans were saying they had more money in their pocket under Trump. So I don't think there's that much he can do, I mean, and let's talk about immigration, because you wrote that great article. Basically, you said in the beginning, you said this past week saw Democrats take up Trump's hard right immigration policy as their own for campaign fodder, with the liberal press assent. The very xenophobia that Democrats decried as fascism has become their policy agenda. And then you said he was, basically implementing all of these policies that Stephen Miller proposed. Can you talk about that? I'm concerned. I know that they're saying immigration is a big issue. Republican governors are saying it's a big issue. But do you think that immigration is such a big issue when it comes to the voting public? Do you think it's getting tough on immigrants? it could backfire?
Well, okay. So if we're just talking about the politics of it, I mean, yeah, I think it is clearly, one of the big kind of sores of his administration, one of the festering sores of his presidency. Partly that is not even partly. I mean, it's a large part of Biden's fault. He could have removed sanctions against Venezuela. He could have, reversed Trump's policy towards Cuba. These are it's this economic squeeze that the U.S. has been putting on these countries for years to absolutely completely pointless. They've done nothing. That these governments that they're trying to remove by this policy have stayed in place. All it's done is increased human misery in these countries and push people to try and seek fortune elsewhere or just try and survive somewhere. And that's what's driving this movement of people. So it's his fault really that this is happening. But nevertheless, for a lot of people, people don't have that much of a detailed understanding of what's going on. These are very complicated issues. And so they just see, or they hear headlines about migrants at the border and, they blame Biden for it. Now, I think he had to do something to address this. The way that they decided to address it is, I don't know what you can say about it. It's extremely cynical. It's, I think, stupid. It's not going to work. In fact, we just saw it didn't work because this entire showdown that they engineered around the border, where the idea was that they were going to push this hard right border bill that basically, as you say, is kind of adopting Trump's immigration policies or Stephen Miller's immigration policies, trying to kind of further chip away at the right to asylum in the United States. And the idea was that by having the Republicans very conspicuously voting against it, that the Democrats can then point to them and say, see, look, we tried to pass the Trump agenda, but the Republicans aren't they irresponsible? You should vote for us. But it didn't work. It didn't work partly because, to be honest, Biden was invisible throughout the entire fight. But in the end, people just kind of chalked it up to general dysfunction in Congress and the U.S. government. And I think, as other people have said, it's not me. Julian Castro made this point. The Democrats, almost no matter what they do, are never going to get points for being tough on the border immigration, because that's just not the perception. Even Obama, basically, so many of the things that Trump ended up doing, were kind of a carry-on from the Obama years, including the kids in cages scandal that started under Obama.
Yeah.
Obama didn't have a reputation as some kind of immigration hawk, even though he was. He was kind of considered more of a, closer to what they would caricature as an open borders policy. So I don't think this is going to work. It seems like that's what the party is putting its hopes for the election. I think that this would be a problem no matter what. But if the administration was taking care of and addressing these concerns that I mentioned before, and that you mentioned in the preamble to that question, the kind of disappearance of the COVID welfare state, or the COVID safety net, the kind of the way that people feel like they're far worse off financially now. If they address that, it'd still be a problem, but people wouldn't be quite as fixated on it. But because everything else feels like it's going wrong, this is kind of just one more thing that takes up headlines and preoccupies people's thinking.
Now, do you think this Trump derangement syndrome, as we call it, but in November they're going to fall in line because they're going to have Trump? They talk about Trump is doing away with democracy. And yes, I understand, because I've read what's his name? Robert Kagan wrote some great essays on all the specific things that Trump is planning to do with electors and election officials and all sorts of things that what we call the levers of democracy. But we don't really have a democracy. We have a plutocracy because he doesn't listen to the will of the people. The vast majority of the people, as you say, including Republicans, want there to be a ceasefire in Gaza, and he, what was I going to say about the democracy? So we don't have a democracy. They don't listen to the will of the people. But Oh gosh, I forgot my second point there.
Well, I will say about that we've seen this story before. In 2016, the assumption was Trump is so horrible that everyone will get turned off and they'll automatically vote for Clinton because look, how could anyone vote for this kind of cartoonish and vile man? And in the end, it didn't work. She lost.
Yeah.
We got 4 years of Trump. And I mean, you look at some of these election results, the 2022 midterms that weren't as much of a rout for the Democrats. They didn't get beaten quite as badly as they thought, and certain other results that suggested that a lot of kind of the way that Trump and his movement and the Republican Party in turn have gone off the deep end is a huge turnoff to voters. There's a basis for thinking that this could happen. That people, once we get to really into the general election campaign, people go, okay, you know what, this guy and the people around him really are crazy and don't know what they're doing. I don't want more of this. I'm going to vote for Biden, even though I don't like it. That could prove to be true, but it's a massive gamble because it could also just as easily not come to pass. Like I said, a lot of people, and as you said, in fact, a lot of people have kind of rosier memories of the Trump years than we might forget, because even though there was all this craziness and dysfunction happening, and there was kind of this huge the media coverage was so kind of chaotic and all over the place, and it seemed like everything was falling apart. In their day-to-day lives, people felt like they were getting along. And even under COVID, even though that was a very turbulent and chaotic time, Trump very smartly, and thanks to Democratic Congress, but the president always gets the credit for that, ended up presiding over this massive expansion of the U.S. welfare state, where people, because of expanded unemployment benefits, because of expanded Medicaid, so many different things, were in a far better position financially. And, I think one of the big mistakes of Biden's presidency is that he did not fight to keep those and make them permanent. Instead, he very willingly presided over the shrinkage of that.
Do you think that has anything to do with his change in chief of staff? Because, he originally had Ron Klain, who talked to progressives, and Bernie Sanders regularly. And then midstream, he switched to this Jeff Zients guy, who was the COVID czar, who had zero experience with COVID or health in general. He was like a private equity guy. Mm-hmm. I got very nervous when that happened. Do you think that had anything to do with it, since Biden isn't really running things?
Yeah, well, no, I think that's exactly it. I think there's many criticisms one can make of Ron Klain, but I think it's clear that he really did take, and not because necessarily he's a great guy or something. I think he just saw which way the political winds were blowing, and he realized, we have to, number one, we have to kind of appease this segment of our party. But number two, I think he also saw that it was the era had changed. Politics at this time had changed. It wasn't the 90s anymore, when Klain and others had first cut their teeth under Biden. And this changed almost instantly as soon as Zients took over, where Biden did the massive oil and gas lease sale, and made a pivot on the border, and a number of other things. And by the way, it didn't get him any increased Republican support, but this seems to be kind of the ethos that is driving decision making in the White House, which is just the classic Democrat strategy of just pivot to the right and try and eat the other guy's lunch, and then don't avoid campaigning on kind of populist economics as much as you can.
Now, did you happen to read or listen to, read about or listen to Ezra Klein's podcast that got the liberal media so, incensed, where he's actually suggesting that maybe they should bring, the Democratic National Convention, they should do it like they used to do it in the old days, where they would pick a candidate there, because obviously it's too late to run somebody else in the primaries. So let these primaries run out and then pick a candidate there. What do you think of that idea?
I mean, I think the basic point that he made has been maybe not that particular detailed, recounting of how you could do it, but the basic point, which is that maybe it would be a good idea for him to, for the good of the party, for the good of the country, to step down and hand it over to someone else. That has been both quietly and loudly been said by a lot of insiders. I mean, the irony of all this stuff about, I mean, let's use the euphemism Biden's age. It's not really about his age. It's about, some of the clear difficulties that we're seeing playing out in public that he's having. The irony is that it's not, kind of people online or, right-wing media that really is driving this stuff. The people that have been bringing it up from the beginning, from 2019 and right up until the last 2 years are people who are inside the party, the Democratic insiders, the members of Congress. They're people like David Ignatius, who have known Biden for decades and, deal with people in a circle every single day and know about the workings of the White House. They're the ones who have been saying, hey, maybe it's time for him to hang it up. So to me, that was a very interesting piece because of the fact that, I mean, to have that show up in the New York Times and from someone like Ezra Klein, who, is, I don't want to say that he's a loyalist, but he's certainly someone who is pro-democratic, someone who doesn't necessarily like to rattle the cage of the Democratic establishment. But he felt the need to kind of say, hey, somebody should intervene here because this is a huge problem. And he got an assist from James Carville, who again also, I mean, now James Carville, there is a Democratic loyalist. He very much is a guy who is a party man. And even he's saying this is a huge problem that his aides don't feel like they can put him out to do a softball interview in the Super Bowl, because how the hell is he going to raise his approval ratings?
Yeah. Do you think that his wife is behind this? Because a lot of people have been saying that she really likes the power. And I remember back in 2020, I was saying, how could she let him go through this? This is terrible. Because I thought he was demented even back then. But, now I'm reading that, it's really his wife that encouraged him to run for re-election. Do you know anything about that?
I really don't. I have no idea.
And what about the decision today by the Supreme Court that they are going to hear the argument on Trump's immunity, and they've expedited that for April, but that may push Jack Smith's case further down, maybe won't be able to be heard before the election. Do you think that'll have any effect on the election?
Yeah, I can't go into that much detail on that at the moment because it's not something that I've followed today. But I mean, I will say that I think that throughout the Trump years, there is a constant search by the Democratic Party to find some sort of cheat code to avoid having to actually kind of solve a political problem, which is, defeating Trumpism, which isn't, just a matter of putting Trump in jail any more than kind of, Bolsonaro in Brazil leaving, him leaving Brazil has kind of ended the Bolsonaro movement. Of course it has. Yeah. And I think, there's this constant hope. I mean, people thought the January 6th stuff was going to finish Trump. It didn't. People thought, the first set of indictments was going to. It didn't. People thought, some of these, the attempt to kind of push him off the ballot would. And he remains an unpopular candidate, just as Biden is, but not someone toxically unpopular. There are still people out there who are willing to vote for him. And I think that the sooner that the party kind of forgets trying to find some kind of, shortcut where they can just try and get rid of him without having to actually politically defeat him, the better, because there's just no avoiding it. You have to try and actually beat this guy at the ballot box and elsewhere.
Now, final question, because we know that the reason that he won was Obama told Pete and Amy to drop out and endorse Biden, who is coming in 5th in these primaries and caucuses. Bernie actually won New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada, and then he later won California with the most delegates. And there's never been a candidate in the history of the Democratic Party who's won those 3 first contests who hasn't gone on to become the nominee. But Bernie was so anathema to Obama that this is what he did. Where do you think Obama is right now as far as whether Joe Biden should drop out?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I'm not going to be the first to point this out, but I mean, where is Obama in general? He's making lists of books and music that he's listening to. He's making Netflix movies and shows. The one kind of major public intervention he made was that one. It was to defeat Sanders and put Biden in his place at great risk, because Obama himself, we know, privately said that he didn't really have a lot of faith that Biden could even win the election. So that's the one thing Obama's really done. I mean, I guess he did a speech for the DNC in 2020 against Trump. But yeah, otherwise he's been completely invisible. It's aside from doing the occasional podcast interview. So it does not seem like he is, gearing up to do anything. I suspect that he's living a very nice, pleasant life, and whether it's Biden or Trump who's the president, I don't think it really makes that much of a difference to Obama's daily existence.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
If you had to make a prediction now, do you think, come back to the title of our show, that Biden is going to be a one-term president?
Oof. I'm not going to make a prediction because I'm not in the prediction business. I really am not. Here's what I'll say. I think if I was a betting man, I would not put my money on Biden winning. I really wouldn't. I would also say, however, if there's one person who could, despite everything that we have talked about in this interview and so much else, somehow just stumble and bumble his way into a completely unearned victory come November and end up going for a second term despite so many things that should work against them, it would be Joseph Robinette Biden, who kind of is the luckiest unlucky man in the world. And I mean, look, that's what happened with the entire election in 2020. It was a complete series of accidents and mistakes and good fortune that just fell into his lap, and he just happened to kind of benefit from all of it. That could certainly happen again. But like I said, I would not put my money on it. And the idea that this, this party that continually says that democracy is on the line with this election, and that their strategy is just to hope and assume that people are just going to automatically just be so horrified come November that they'll all come out and vote for Biden, that's their strategy. I mean, that is deeply, deeply irresponsible, breathtakingly irresponsible.
Yeah, that's the other point I was going to make about democracy. This is the most undemocratic party. They're literally canceling primaries. They canceled the primary in Florida. They would not put Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips on the ballot in my state of North Carolina. I mean, it's really outrageous. And they've cleared the field for this guy. And anyway, Branko, thank you so much. I appreciate your wisdom as always. And I encourage people to share this show. And I'm going to close the way I always close, because I believe that a lot of my followers are activists out there on the issues, forgetting even about electoral politics. So I'm going to say, keep fighting. Good night, everybody.